Joining me now on this edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. The Knicks have played a lot better lately, at least better since the trade deadline. Undefeated with Josh Hart. And what better way to test their undefeated stretch since the trade deadline than the best record in the NBA, a division rival, and a team coming off of one of the more exhilarating victories in Philadelphia the night before. And joining me to talk about this Knicks matchup against the Boston Celtics is Jack Simone. He is a writer for Celtics blog and one half of the How Bout Them Celtics podcast. Jack, welcome to the Knicks Film School Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Big stretch for the Knicks, obviously a big stretch for the Celtics. It's going to be a good game. I'm excited for it.
So I mentioned a little bit before the show that last night's game was a little exhilarating for you, especially the ending of it. Much different than the Knicks game against the Pelicans, which was over really at halftime. Honestly, kind of over in the first quarter. But it's funny. I was thinking as I was watching the Celtics Sixers game that just how different the interview would have gone if it was reversed. Like if the Knicks were playing the Sixers today and I was talking to somebody, the mood would be so much different. I would feel like I was talking to someone like with a family member in the hospital rather than somebody that just got engaged, you know? So if you want to just tell Knicks fans for those who don't know, Jason Tatum hit a 3 to give the Celtics a 3-point lead with 1.3 seconds left. And then because the Sixers were out of timeout, Embiid had to throw not even a 3/4 court, a 4/5 of the court heave to try and tie it. He did, but it was just barely late. Knicks fans, I'm sure even Celtics fans will remember they were getting deja vu of Amari Stoudemire against the Celtics back in 2010. Take me through the last 10 seconds of the game last night.
Yeah, every part of my being thought that the Joel Embiid shot counted. It was flashbacks to the conference finals when Jimmy Butler heaved that 3-pointer that would have put them Miami ahead in Game 7. Again, the feeling of as soon as the ball leaves their hands, I thought the shot was going in. Every instinct in my body knew Joel Embiid was going to somehow make that shot. I was just very glad it didn't happen 0.2 seconds earlier in the shot clock. I mean, what a ridiculous game. You said Jason Tatum nailing that shot at the end of regulation to put the Celtics up. I'll add the contingency. Jason Tatum nailing that shot after being horrible for the entirety of the game. Jason Tatum was awful. And usually when you talk about Jason Tatum being quote unquote bad, it is just him shooting efficiently. Jason Tatum had no rhythm. He was passing up good looks. He was turning the ball over. He couldn't find his teammates. That was arguably Tatum's worst game of the season. Joe Mazzulla put him back in at the end of games anyways. We were talking about this. A lot of people were upset. Joe Mazzulla didn't play Derek White. He's in an impossible situation with so many good players that he can finish the game with. Jason Tatum will always be on the court. He is that level of player, just like I assume Jalen Brunson has been for the season. If Jalen Brunson shoots 5 for 20, he's still going to be on the court at the end of the fourth quarter for the Knicks. So Jason Tatum, after playing terribly, coming in clutch, hitting that final shot, big stretch at the end of the game. Even from a neutral perspective, it was like an all-timer. That is what a national TV game should be. It was a great game, and the Celtics just happened to squeak by.
So this is real. Celtics fan. There are Celtics fans that wanted Jason Tatum to not play down the stretch in crunch time.
Celtics fans will find any reason to complain, and you
well versed in this world. Yes, continue.
Yeah, hey, you love it because they're so passionate, but Celtics fans all season, I don't know if this is like a known thing outside of like Celtics Twitter, lots of Joe Mazzulla complaints. Joe, and I say this a lot. Joe Mazzulla was put in an impossible situation when he took the job this year because if they did well, then he was supposed to do well. This team made the finals last year. But if he does poorly, then it is, well, he's the only difference between this year's team and last year's team. Joe Mazzulla, it's his fault, right? So he was never going to get the credit he deserved. It was an impossible situation. I think he's done a great job. He's elevated their offense. They were bad on defense to start the year. They've turned it around, top 4 defensive team now. But with the talent they have on the floor, there are going to be players left out of the end of game rotation. And some people were saying Jason Tatum's been so bad, put Derek White on the floor. And in the defense of those people, Derek White was good enough, and I think he should have been on the floor. But at that point, who you're going to take off? Marcus Smart is the easy argument, in my opinion, because he was okay that game, and Derek White's a guard, so that's an easy switch. A lot of people said Grant Williams shouldn't have been on the floor, but my thing is, you need that size against Embiid. Grant Williams is really strong. He's one of the only players on the Celtics who can contend with Embiid. And when I say contend with Embiid, I mean just slow him down a little bit, because you're not going to stop Joel Embiid in the post. So you had a lot of people complaining that about Joe Mazzulla's end of game rotations. I'm not going to sit here and say they were perfect. Like I said, I think Derek White should have been on the floor. But yeah, a lot of people, complaining about that in particular. And like I said, though, you're not going to have Jason Tatum not be on the floor at the end of the game.
So I'm laughing because since we started this pregame show, and I've got to talk to a lot of people from other fan bases.
Yeah.
The common thread is that nobody's happy with their coach. Talking to a Miami Heat content creator, and they're blaming Spo. Talking to you name it, the team could be undefeated, and it's like they should win more. It's like, wait, but they haven't lost. Like the levels to which coach criticism is just kind of broken. Which look, I'm not like Tibbs is unapologetically, can be defended in everything. I do think there's some things I wish he would be different about. He needs
Obi Toppin would like a word.
Well, quite literally, that's the biggest thing, is that we've turned this high flying, rim running, acrobatic star from Dayton into like a corner boy, So I understand there are some things to quibble about. Even the Cam Reddish thing was.
Yeah,
I think it got to a level of insanity toward the end where it was like he's the missing piece, and it's like I would love to see him get minutes on a team that doesn't matter. Whatever Portland's gonna be, I'm glad he's going to a place what the Warriors just did with Wiseman. He needed to go to a place like Chris Ryan of The Ringer just mentioned.
Absolutely.
This. He needed to go to a place that you're not getting yanked after your first one or two mistakes. Like make all the mistakes you can, go develop, go learn how to be a basketball player. There's some of that in Cam. I think his ceiling's a lot higher. And that became such a sticking point with Knicks fans. And then you get a quote unquote Tibbs guy and Josh Hart. Everything's fixed. I'm not going to say I'm curious how this is going to look against the best team with the best record in the East on Monday night. But coach criticism, it just seems like nobody's happy with their coach. And I'm not surprised that the team with the best record in the NBA also has a fan base that is critical of said coach as well,
A lot of fire Mazzulla. A lot of fire Mazzulla all season. It's crazy because
who's like the coach or whoever that they're clamoring for?
Surprisingly, and I'm fully against it because I think it's kind of gross. A lot of bring Ime back. A lot of this team needs Ime. A lot of not exactly what you want to hear. It's and even when it's not that, it is. It doesn't matter. Oh, you see sprinkles of Brad Stevens needs to step up and be the coach again. Well, first of all, Brad Stevens, arguably a better GM than he was a coach, and was a phenomenal coach. But it's a lot of whenever the Celtics lose, and this isn't me saying there are criticisms for Joe Mazzulla. His timeouts, he hoards them. He doesn't use them enough. That is something. The rotations, like I said, I thought Derek White should be out there. There's stuff like that. He is notoriously short in pressers, not in a rude way, but he'll just be yes, that is what I wanted. He'll just give you one-line responses, and it's kind of funny sometimes. But the people sitting there, the Celtics will lose 2 games in a row. They went on this ugly home stretch. They lost to the Pacers at home, then they lost 2 to the Magic at home, and everyone, the immediate reaction was fire Mazzulla. He's bad, right? Not maybe the Celtics should play a little better. No, it is immediately fire the coach. It is never the Celtics should play better, even though. For 3 years in a row, the Celtics, which is weird considering they're the best team, they've had 3 different coaches in the span of 3 years, right? You don't really think about that when you think of the Celtics. It's Brad Stevens, Ime Udoka, now Joe Mazzulla. And when they have problems, they are the same problems throughout all 3 years. And yet, despite the fact that the consistent part is the players and the one thing changing is the coaches, fans still seem to blame the coaches, even though the issues are the same for 3 years. So it's never made sense to me. I've never been a blame the coach guy. I think it's kind of a lazy take to say blame the coach when the players are the one playing. Obviously there are criticisms, but there's too much of it out there.
Do I agree there's too much of it? Yes. I think to throw the blame the coach crowd a bone, the thing that coaches can control, like the timeout situation, like the minutes distribution. That's the thing that actually frustrates me. I just don't look at that as much as I guess others do. And look, to their credit, a lot of the things that Knicks fans were clamoring for last year, more Emmanuel Quickley minutes, more staggering of the rotations. They've done that this year. not for nothing, but why is Derrick Rose still playing was a calling card for before the season. And it was when he got taken out of the rotation for good in December that it really turned the Knicks season around. Now let's migrate a bit from coach talk. While I love talking about the status of coach criticism in today's league. The Celtics, since I don't mean to bring up a memory for you, since an RJ Barrett buzzer beater last year, they went 33-10 after that stretch and made it to the NBA Finals and are 44-17 this season. So first of all, you're welcome. Second of all, between Udoka and the version of the team that exists this year, what would you say is the biggest difference that you've seen? Because it's like we can only box score scout, and I'm not watching the team every day like you are. What really changed in this team from then till now?
Yeah, it's very cliche to say culture, and I think it's deeper than that. But that's the best all-encompassing term I can use. The Celtics just kind of seem to completely buy in first to what Udoka was saying last year, and now to what Mazzulla has kind of amplified. JJ Redick talked about it, on his podcast. Mm-hmm. He had Mikal Bridges on, but before that, he did a pre-interview talk, and he talked about Mazzulla a lot. And Redick basically said it's all about getting the best out of your players, the players you have on the court, and that's what makes a good coach. And I think Mazzulla has done that this year, and I think Udoka did it best last year. And you heard. Even before the RJ Barrett 3 that kind of fixed the Celtics, Marcus Smart sort of call out the Jays, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown in the media saying they don't pass, right? And that was a harsh thing to say, and a lot of people got mad at Smart for it, but it was completely true. He just said what no one was willing to. The Jays weren't passing. It was so much isolation ball, and when the Celtics fumble and when they, falter this year, it is isolation ball. It is because there's not enough passing. And when the Celtics are at their best, they are moving the ball and they are locking in on defense, completely shutting down opponents. And I think the whole team really bought into that at the end stretch of last year and into the finals. And then this year, I think they amplified it and built on it to where they're still doing all that good stuff. But I also think the locker room and the culture of the team this year is huge. And as weird as it sounds, a lot of that is Blake Griffin is the end of the bench guys. Because last year, the big issue you saw in the finals was the Celtics had an 8-man rotation that was elite. But when 3 of those 8 having an off night, you don't have anybody else to turn to, right? Mm-hmm. You had Aaron Nesmith off the bench. You had, Daniel Tice, who's a fine center, but you didn't have that extra depth. Now they added Malcolm Brogdon. They added players that can play. Luke Cornett's playing well, former Knicks legend, right? Luke Cornett's having a good season in Boston. Sam Hauser has developed into a really good piece. Even Blake Griffin has turned up for them when they need him to. And then not only that, not only having guys who can step up and play, but having guys who are willing to buy into that role. Blake Griffin, Jay King of The Athletic just put an article about it. Go read it if you haven't. Phenomenal piece about how Blake Griffin has understood that he's not the Blake Griffin he once was. And now he's just this complete team guy, right? He's cracking jokes. He's doing impressions of coaches in the locker room, right? He's just a vibes guy. And that's the best way to describe it. He's a vibes guy. And that's exactly what the Celtics team needed after going to the finals and after finally figuring out what makes them a good team. Now they are able to do all of these things that make them such a good team, the ball movement, the defense, the flowing offense. And they've combined it with a great locker room. Malcolm Brogdon saying that this is the best locker room he's ever been a part of. And I think all of that is culminated together in the Celtics that you're seeing this season. So I think it's a mix of buying into playing the right way, the passing, the ball movement, and then locking down on defense, as well as this, improved locker room chemistry.
Yeah, the play last year that stood out to me of this is a different Celtics team, and this is probably too simplistic to just narrow it down to one play, but I digress. Is the game winner against Brooklyn in game 1, where it's 4 passes. Smart makes the extra pass to Tatum for the layup, and that's the game winner to give the Celtics a game 1 victory. And that's indicative of a clear culture shift, as you mentioned. Is this team better than last year? And as a result, how do you like your chances to get back to the finals and even win it this year?
I think this team is better than last year. You got to consider you added Malcolm Brogdon, Sam Hauser's an actual piece now. Luke Cornett's a fine backup center, traded for Mike Muscala at the deadline. Blake Griffin can play a little bit. They still need to fill that final roster spot, but even Derek White's made an improvement this year, right? So everybody on the team has gotten better. I think Mazzulla has done a good job of the offense was really good down the stretch last year, but he's kind of improved it even more, taking it a step further. And they're a lot crisper on offense. They're playing faster a little bit, so that's improved. And like I said, I think it's really underrated, the vibes of the locker room, right? It sounds really cliche. It sounds really, like weird, not the first thing you'd look at, but I think it's important to have that team chemistry behind the scenes. And I think a lot of the times people want, like after a loss, people want Jason Tatum to be mad. People want people to be upset. But after losses this year, you're hearing, we know what the ultimate goal is. This loss sucks, but we'll be better next time, right? This is not the end game, right? We want to win as many games as we can, but we know what the goal is. And so we're not going to let one loss completely derail us. And I think that calming, cool-headedness of the Celtics is really important too. So I do think this team is better. And as far as their chances, I think they have some of the best chances in the league, right? I think there are very few teams who could derail the Celtics in a playoff series. I think the Celtics can beat any team in a playoff series. This isn't me saying like they're going to roll through the East. I do think they could stumble against certain teams, but I don't think there's a team in the league that you look at and say, okay, yeah, the Celtics are going to lose to that team. I don't think they have a very good chance. And I think that's just indicative of how deep they are and the steps Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have taken.
So thank you for the segue, because you mentioned Jaylen Brown.
Mm-hmm.
It's only really the last couple of years that I've become more of a numbers guy. I've always been very much like watch the game and
eye test.
Like hopefully, well, just mostly hopefully the numbers that I do like back up with the eye test.
Yes.
Saying, like I like I'm a big baseball fan. And so as a result, I hate how it's become like I don't need to watch baseball to understand certain things. Like the thing I enjoy about baseball are the things that I'm watching. But having said that, I'm so confused by Jaylen Brown's advanced stats and how they like help me understand this. The on-off, he's in the 20th percentile. All of the impact metrics hate him. How do you make sense of what's going on with Jaylen Brown in that sense to what? I mean, you talk to a Celtics fan like yourself, and like you said, he's taken a step forward this year.
So I got absolutely torn apart on Celtics Twitter in December, I think it was, because I wrote an article. I don't want to say ripping Jaylen Brown, but like pointing out a lot of things that he doesn't do well. Jaylen Brown, and this is a hot take I said on the podcast, and I probably regret it a little bit, but I said, if you want a bucket, I would almost take Jaylen Brown over Jason Tatum. Like I'm not talking like, oh, you need a 3-point shot. You need this. I'm talking, you need somebody to get to their spot and make a bucket. Jaylen Brown is right there, if not better than Jason Tatum. He can hit the mid-range. He's hitting the mid-range at a ridiculous level this season that most shouldn't be sustainable, but it has been. He's good at driving to the hoop. However, he has a lot of bad turnovers. Right, he holds the ball too long. He'll fumble while he's driving to the lane, and this stuff I pointed out in the article I wrote for Celtics Blog. He's objectively not a very good passer, right? And this is me. I love Jaylen Brown. He's the second best player on a great team. He's an all-star, all-NBA player, right? Not a great passer. He misses passes a lot. He had a big pass that he missed. It was Pacers game, I think. Driving in transition, threw it about 12 feet above Al Horford's head in a transition. Should have been an easy bucket, right? He misses a lot of easy passes. And the off-ball defense in particular has been pretty rough this year. There's a lot of clips of him standing in the corner, ball watching, getting beat on a back cut, right? So those are the main things I pointed out. And I think that's a big reason why some of these plus minus stats aren't great, because in the lineups where it is Jaylen Brown in the bench and Jason Tatum's not on the court, he's not as good at leading an offense, right? Jason Tatum's really developed as a passer. He's really developed, a good ability to play off the ball, to make these cuts, to do, other things outside of scoring. At his core, Jaylen Brown is a bucket getter, right? He's a great rebounder. He's taken a big step there this year as well. But when he's on the court, leading the offense, quote unquote, things kind of fall apart a little bit. So he really needs, a Malcolm Brogdon, a Marcus Smart, a Derek White on the court next to him, handling the ball, helping set him up for things. Because at his core, he is an isolation basketball player, and he's elite at it, right? He's an elite bucket getter. He's a great rebounder, but it is the stagnant offense that comes when he has the ball in his hands and he's trying to run things because he's just not as good as Jason Tatum at it. And that's fine, right? You just don't put him in situations where he has to do that. And I think the Celtics have gotten better at that because of the rough stretch he had when Jason Tatum missed some time and a little bit early in the year. But I think that's where a lot of it comes from is because he's not an offensive leader. He is the focal point of an offense, if that makes sense. A little weird, but
no, it does. It's very clear he's the second guy and needs to be the second guy. While like there are many great second guys out there. Middleton is an idea, the ideal situation where if he's your best player, you're probably like a 40-41 win team. But if he's your second guy, you can win the title with him, especially if you have a third guy like Drew Holiday in that sense. I it's tough to look at just the counting stats with Brown. Like we have like Julius Randle, like his transition defense can be really poor. The way the Knicks play, we were talking about this in like a Knicks Film School group chat about how the Knicks transition defense is almost like designed to fail because they're always crashing the offensive boards. So as a result, when Randall's crashing the boards and like Hartenstein or whoever is playing center is crashing the boards, even Josh Hart, that leaves Jalen Brunson back in transition if there isn't a board. So it'll be fascinating to see this up close and in person. For the Jaylen Brown thing is a fascinating test case of eye test versus what the numbers are saying, because like you said, like you really do have to watch and I guess see the turnovers and see the defense to see why the points that he's scoring aren't necessarily as impactful as everything else. Another player on the Celtics that is becoming a bit of an enemy, but for unnecessary reasons, but bear with me, is Malcolm Brogdon. And it's because he's probably the front runner to win Sixth Man of the Year. May I submit Emmanuel quickly into the conversation, who the impact metrics love him. He's arguably the best defender on the Knicks. I think Mitchell Robinson would win because of his rim protection, but Quickly's off-ball defense and his anticipation in passing lanes has been elite this season, to the point where he better get some all defense votes. I don't know about an all defense team. That's like kind of a reputation type of thing, but Emmanuel Quickly's been great. If you had to make the case for Malcolm Brogdon to be the Sixth Man of the Year, what would it be?
I think, as with all awards, winning will always play a part of it. If you're on a better team, I feel like voters are just more inclined to vote for that person. I think what Malcolm Brogdon has brought to the Celtics is less appreciated because of how good they were without him. If that makes sense, right? Like last year, they made the finals, right? The second stretch run they made was without Malcolm Brogdon. They were arguably the best team in the league for the second half of the season last year. And you could make an argument that it wasn't close, right? The on-off numbers, the plus-minus numbers for them, the net rating, all of that was elite. Their defense was stopping everything, right? But what kind of fell apart in the finals for them was they didn't have an extra shot creator, right? Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum, if one of them was having an off night, the Celtics kind of faltered, right? And Jason Tatum didn't play particularly well in the finals. And so the Celtics obviously didn't win the finals. Adding another guy who can create his own shot and also create for others, but isn't requiring the ball at all times is huge, right? Malcolm Brogdon can play off the ball. He's leading the NBA in 3-point percentage this year, the best 3-point shooting year of his career. I think he shoot like 45% from three, which is absurd, right? He's hitting his threes. He can create for others. He's done a great job of, creating for Tatum, creating for Jaylen, making it so Jaylen Brown doesn't have to handle the ball, which I just talked about was a big problem at times this year for him. And he can also just get buckets when you need him to, right? Like say Jason Tatum's having a cold night, or say Jaylen Brown's out, say one of them's not playing. Malcolm Brogdon can just put up a casual 30 points off the bench for you, right? And he's averaging, off the top of my head, I think like 14, 4 and 4, something around there, right? So he's just doing plus playing solid defense, right? He's a solid defender. He's not amazing, right? I'm not going to sit here and argue like he's quickly all defensive team, but he's a solid defender, and you need to be a solid defender on a team like the Celtics where they switch stuff and where everyone has to play a part. And so I think his ability to take an already great team and elevate their offense to the next level is what will put him in that conversation. Although I will say, I think, as is the case with some of these other awards, but I think more than any other award, counting stats is what wins you Sixth Man of the Year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not I agree with that, I think is a different question because I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think it should be a bucket getter award. Like, for example, outside of his health, which has been a problem because he hasn't been on the court consistently, Bobby Portis averaging almost a double-double off the bench. He's not even in conversations because he's not averaging 15 points a night, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think the defense, like you're saying for Quickly, and I think impact overall off the bench isn't taken into account as much as counting stats, which is why I think Norm Powell will probably get a lot of the votes because he's putting up 17 points off the bench, which I don't think he should be as high in the running as he is. And he's a great bucket getter, but I just hate that that's what the award has become. It is, if you score the most points off the bench, you win, right? But I think what Brogdon has done has gone past the points, right? He's obviously averaging, I think, probably the third most points in the Celtics, but it's his ability to keep the offense flowing and elevate an already elite team that I think should have him in that running.
Which, okay, so fair. Well, look, to your point about it's become a bucket getter award. Look no further than the fact the front runner for Sixth Man of the Year until 2 weeks ago was Russell Westbrook. So I think that is a fair evaluation of what the award has become. Emmanuel Quickly is the biggest difference maker, I would say, from last year to this year with the Knicks. Him taking a step up. And look, to your point about winning being a deciding factor as well. Will the Knicks finish with the best record in the East? No. If they finish with the fourth best record in the East and they take this leap and they get to like 46, 47 wins and he's still in the 90th percentile and on off, then I think that at least makes him in the top three consideration, at least is in my head. But I am admittedly biased for this conversation. I want to ask about Jason Tatum because I'm sure. You talk about bucket getters, one of the more gifted scorers the league has had. You honestly saw it from the moment he stepped on a basketball court that rookie season. You saw sprinkles of it. How is he discussed in Boston? Does it? Because I know, like New York, Boston is like where are the banners, where are the titles? You know, there's always a next level that you have to get to in order to impress me. How is he discussed or even appreciated in Boston?
I think there's two different crowds. I think there are the Celtics fans who watch the games, and then there are Boston sports radio people. And those are two different groups, right? There are the people who watch every game. They're fans of the team, and those people appreciate Jason Tatum because they know how good he's been, right? And I am a big rings aren't everything guy. I am a big my podcast co-host, for example, hates Zach LaVine. Thinks Zach LaVine is terrible. This is random, but there's a point.
No, this is a conversation around Knicks world with the Knicks almost trading RJ Barrett for Zach LaVine, so I get it.
Thinks Zach LaVine is awful because the Bulls are bad, right? And because they don't win. My thing is, you can be a good player on a bad team. And how does this connect to Jason Tatum? Boston Sports Radio, there was I think something recently came out, a narrative. I think Dan Shaughnessy wrote something saying he needs to win a championship, right? He doesn't do anything. He hasn't proven anything. Basically, I want to find the exact quote, but like just saying that basically Tatum's not good enough until he wins the championship, which is ridiculous, right? Like he is arguably a top 5 player in the NBA, and half of the conversation around him hasn't won a title yet. Not good, right? So I have the quote here. Dan Shaughnessy wrote verbatim, he hasn't won a championship. And there are times when he seems too much the embodiment of today's American-born, AAU-groomed, egomaniacal NBA superstar. He missed a game to go home to St. Louis for his son's birthday party in December. Just before the All-Star break, he missed an important game in Milwaukee with a non-COVID illness. Celtics subs lost in overtime. Then he came back to play it that night at home against the lowly Pistons. So Tatum is getting criticized for being a father and being sick. So that right there should tell you what Boston sports radio. Not to interrupt, but like that's also screams like white gatekeeping journalist that grew up in a different time, or like grew to fame in a different time when you could get away with articles like that, which don't consider what you're mentioning, that these are people. You know, exactly. You're absolutely right. And that is one of the biggest things I hate about Boston media. Right. And I can respect all the work all of these older, writers did. They paved the way. They're great. They're great at what they did. But too often is it well, this, they're not beating each other up on the court, so this basketball is soft, or this dude is a father, but he's not but he should be a basketball player first. Like these are humans. And that is like the biggest thing that I think gets lost with a lot of these, like you said, old white men who covered the sport in the 80s and 90s, right? Is they assume that all of these players should be basketball players first and human beings second. And the fact that he pointed out as a knock for Tatum, him going home to, spend his birthday with his son, like that shows, that's enough right there for to tell you how ridiculous it is. So, like I said, the people who watch the games, the Celtics fans who are there every day, appreciating what he is doing on the court, love Jason Tatum. I think Jason Tatum has been runner-up for MVP this year. I know I'm a Celtics guy. I think Nikola Jokic is the MVP regardless. Tatum is in MVP conversation. He's a top 5 player on the planet. What he is doing is crazy. It is amazing, and he's leading the best team in the NBA. Boston sports radio people, who again I will group into their own crowd, think he's not good enough because he hasn't done one thing.
Shout out to the hub, man. It's a thing I wrestle with too, because I can't stand load management. Like that is something I will put on players. And like the Dame Lillard thing that happened the other day,
that was funny.
I disliked it because of the concept of like I was on a plane and therefore I couldn't play the next day. And it's like, oh my, like, or your team, like, why couldn't Jeremy Grant play? Then you had 10 days off, like there's a certain thing where that rubbed me the wrong way. I just despise tanking and what it does more specifically to the product of the sport, even if it is an efficient way to get higher position in the draft. But in that sense, where the Shaughnessy's and the older regime talks about their athletes, especially in a sport with the complexion that it is, I'm in lockstep with you. And also we'll always give you the floor if you want to criticize Boston in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from just south of Boston. I love Massachusetts. I am very I'm gonna move into Boston this summer, right? I love it, but the whole narrative around sports specifically, because it's like the only thing that matters to half people here, is pretty gross. If you want my honest opinion, I hate it. I try to, I'm working on something behind the scenes now in a long thing that hopefully is like straying away from you are only a basketball player. That is who you are. You are nothing else. And I that narrative has always been pretty wild to me. And I mean, a big part of it, not to go on another tangent, and I won't take too much of your time. The whole All-Star game thing. The whole All-Star game thing, Jeff Van Gundy was complaining. I think it was him. It was either him or Mark Jackson on the broadcast last night of Celtics Sixers. Like, they should just get rid of the game. These guys aren't playing hard in the All-Star game. You have 82 regular season games to watch basketball, and you're focused right now, and you're taking up broadcast time of what is an amazing basketball game that we're watching to complain that they don't care about a game that does absolutely. Of course, they're not going to care about the All-Star game, right? It means nothing. Like they have nothing to gain from playing it, other than maybe an injury, other than Kemba Walker injuring his knee by playing like 40 minutes in an All-Star game, basically derailing his entire career. That was the point of the end for Kemba Walker. And as much as anybody.
Oh yeah.
Kemba Walker, right? Nick Nurse playing him that many minutes in the All-Star game started at the beginning of the end. So like it's the All-Star game complaints. It is they're not punching each other in the face. It is they're human beings and not basketball players. It's ridiculous. And you laugh, but that's the biggest thing too. People,
I get it.
They're not physical enough, right? Like, yeah. So I'm sorry, the NBA changed their rules so they can't punch each other. Darn, watch UFC. Like I don't know. It gets me mad.
As somebody who grew up on the 90s Knicks, I'm not going to pretend that there isn't like some nostalgia. Sure. Like, I haven't talked about this on a pod with anybody yet. The JJ Redick against the 80s thing that's going on right now is one of the funniest things to exist. But I also I agree with both sides. Like, yes, was it more difficult to play in the 80s because you might have to worry about a clothesline on your way to the rim? Yes. Should they have gotten rid of that so you actually have to play defense with your feet? Yes. Like, it's like both sides are correct. Larry Bird was literally dealing with assault in the paint, and now you have to deal with much better perimeter defenders as a result. So it's almost like a push and pull of each way. My only take on the All-Star game, while I do agree with Van Gundy and Jackson that it was bad basketball. It's not an actual
game anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so it's should they have dedicated airtime 10 days later to it? No. I also think that we saw a competitive All-Star game last year. We saw a competitive All-Star game 2-3 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
And it's because LeBron and Giannis were on the court for the majority of it. LeBron and Giannis didn't play. You need a guy that's like, all right, it's the fourth quarter. We're strapping up and this is going to matter. We're going to play.
It just
tough.
wasn't close this year, right? Like, and the Elam ending fixes it, I think. But when it's already a blow up by the third quarter, there's nothing that's going to happen. And if it was a closer game, I guarantee you they would have played harder because that's what's happened the last 2 years.
Well,
but
to be fair, the first one with the Elam ending wasn't close going to. It was like a double-digit lead going into the fourth quarter. But because that's why I think there needed to be a guy that like an alpha on either side that was like, okay, now we're going at it. And when LeBron leaves with an injury and Giannis plays one possession, it very much felt like, all right, let's just get our 48 minutes in and then and get out of here. But I digress. The New York Boston thing is a thing, obviously. Then, like I'd asked you before, are you a Red Sox fan? Are you into baseball at all?
I was a big baseball guy when I was younger because my dad was a baseball fan, so I grew up as a baseball kid. And I admittedly didn't start being like a big Celtics guy until I was like 13, 14. And by that point, it was like the Jeff Green Celtics. So I often say Jeff Green is like the guy who got me into basketball, which is like obscene, right? But so I missed like the title in 2008. I missed the end of the big three and stuff. But before that, I was a big Red Sox. I had posters. This is very niche, but Julio Lugo. I was a big,
that is very niche. Wow.
Yeah, niche. I had a Julio Lugo signed bat, right? Like I was big. My brother loved Mark Bellhorn, like deep into Red Sox, right? But I was telling you before the show, I went through a phase where I really wanted to be unique, right? I was like, oh, everyone's Red Sox and Pats fans. And so I was a Saints fan, right? For football. I was a Saints fan the year they won the Super Bowl, by the way. And I was a Saints fan in the preseason too. So I'm not taking any bandwagon.
Hopped on at the right time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was great. And I know you mentioned I was a Mets fan. I was a huge Jose Reyes guy. When I was younger, I had a lizard, like a bearded dragon. His name was Jose after Jose Reyes. So I was a Mets guy for a period of time. I have since reformed and I'm now a Red Sox guy again. But the Mets are like my second favorite team because of that time I had. So
there has to be a hint of like we both hate the Yankees. Like when the Mets have this group, the Mets fans have this group called the Seven Line. They go and travel to games here and there. It's like a really cool group of like a couple dozen people. They have an actual section in center field.
Oh wow!
I say a couple dozen, a couple hundred people go and travel to a couple road trips every year. And they went to Boston, I want to say in 2018, and a Yankee suck chant broke out. And it was one of my favorite moments in New York, Boston history, because it was like, oh, common ground. The Red Sox are winning in the 8th inning and we're chanting Yankee suck.
I love it.
So with that in mind, I'm going to give the floor to a Boston guy to tell me about the Knicks. I like to get before we wrap up, I like to get people's perspective on how they view what the Knicks are doing. And the team that I know they've been a punching bag and deservedly so for the most of this millennium. But I guess this century, although you could argue this millennium too, but the last 2 decades have not been the greatest. Honestly, last 3 years with ups and downs involved have been better. How do you see the Knicks and what they're doing right now?
Yeah. So if you have my podcast co-host Sam on, he is, I will say, the more homer of us. So he doesn't like the Knicks, right? He'll go off on these tangents. Anybody outside the Celtics sucks, right? That's him. I kind of like the Knicks. Maybe that's like,
wow.
I shouldn't because I'm a Boston guy. Love Jaylen Brunson. He's been so good. There's not, I thought he should have been an all-star over Julius Randle, not because like the counting stats are better, but like I think Brunson's place on the Knicks has allowed Julius Randle to go back to what he does best. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I said, my opinion is because of the impact Brunson has had, I think that's what should have made him the all-star. Not that Julius Randle didn't deserve it. He's having a great season, but like purely from game changer perspective, from like last year to this year, it is so clear as day that Brunson is the difference, right? And so I think he deserves a ton of credit. I love Jaylen Brunson. I love what he's been doing. He's awesome. I don't know. They're fun because of Brunson and because of like how well they're playing compared to expectations. Like, I don't think a lot of people thought the Knicks would be quite as good as they are coming into this year. I think a lot of people expected, okay, yeah, they'll be a play-in team. They'll be all right. Brunson's fine. But like, they've exceeded that, right? They're playing better. They're like you said, they're making a push for a top 6 team in the East. The Nets falter kind of helps that. When the Nets made the trade, I said something pretty stupid. I said I still think the Nets are better than the Knicks. I rephrased. I think the Nets probably have a little bit better depth than the Knicks, just because of like the long list of wings. Again, it was a hot take. It was a ESPN Stephen A. Smith take that I retract. So it
was a performative take that didn't mean anything. Gotcha.
It was bad. Yes, I'll admit it in hindsight. It was bad, but no, yeah. I like the Knicks. I think what they're doing this year is great. I think they will probably push for that top 6 seed. I don't think they'll fall back into the play, and I think they are like, the way I say it is, of the group of the Wizards, the Hawks, the Nets now, the Heat. I think the Knicks are the best of that tier, and I think they will push in for a top 6 seed. I don't think they'll pass like the Cavs and the Sixers. I don't think they'll get up that high, but I think they are definitively a top 6C team in the East this year. And so I really like what they've been doing. I love Jaylen Brunson. Even when they made that contract, a lot of people were like, what are you doing? I loved it. I thought it was great off rip. I love Josh Hart heading into this year. My hot take was he was going to win player, most improved, right? Because he had that great stretch with the Blazers at the end of last year. I thought the Blazers were, I don't know why they traded him, right? And maybe it's because they're trying to reform or whatever. For a team that plays no defense, to get rid of a guy who does nothing but hustle and play defense, foolish. I thought it was a great pickup for the Knicks. I think he's great. So yeah, I'm higher on the Knicks than I think you would expect for most Boston people.
Well, I appreciate it. And by the way, your co-host Sam will be reaching out because I do want to. I want to get the Homer Red Sox on here.
Oh yeah, he might pull it back. He might pull it back for like an outsider show. But if you push him for it, you can tell him I said it. You can tell him to go full on. Yeah.
But with your perspective, I also think they're a top 6 seed. I actually think we need to start recalling it a top 5 seed, because not necessarily for the Knicks, but like Brooklyn doesn't matter anymore. So there's no 5 clear teams better than the Knicks right now. So I would put the top 4 of Cleveland, Boston, Milwaukee, and obviously Cleveland, Boston, Milwaukee, and Philly in the top 4. And then it's like from 5 to 11 really are a bunch of teams competing for 6 spots, I guess. They're playing the best basketball I've seen in a long time. Even that We Here season 2 years ago, 2 years ago, that felt like found money, and this actually seems like
real,
analytically planned and sustainable. And like they have all these guys under contract, and none of them's on a max deal. That I think is why the Josh Hart trade happened. By the way, he's a free agent at the end of the year, and the Knicks will extend him. Whereas, and look, I also have no idea what they're doing in Portland, where they're taking it like rolling a dice on Cam, which like maybe he pops and it's great, but you also have Dame and a Hall of Famer, and you're allegedly trying to build around him. So we'll see what happens there. And I think as far as Knicks fans and the hysteria that happens sometimes when the Knicks are good, this game against Boston is going to be a big test. And I guess my last question, do you expect to win? Are you less confident because of how good the Knicks are playing? How do you view this matchup on Monday night?
Again, to reference my co-host, he believes the Celtics should win every game.
So 82-0. Okay.
Oh, yes. But at the beginning of last year, he said the Celtics should go 8-0 to start the season. This is the first, like, he is full on. If the Celtics are playing a game, they are good enough where they should win it. And like, I understand, because they are the best team in the league. And so I think they can win against every team. Obviously, that is not the case. Coming out of the All-Star break, I said that the Celtics 7-game stretch out of the break would determine their path for the rest of the season, because they're kind of chasing 60 wins right now, in a way. And I think that's a good goal for them. Not that it matters in the long run, because the playoffs are what matter, but like a 60 wins, you're an elite team, right? And so coming into the All-Star break, they had Indiana, Philly, New York, Cleveland, Brooklyn, New York, Cleveland, right? So they're going to have New York twice, Cleveland twice in that stretch. I like you said, I think the Nets aren't necessarily a threat. They don't really have an offensive creation. I was foolish to say that they were better than the Knicks, and again, hand up. But,
hold on. To your point, I do like what Brooklyn did. I think they're missing a guy to kind of steer the ship, like, because they have a lot of complementary pieces. It's funny.
A lot of defense.
Like what we said when they made the Durant deal was like, you know what this team would be great. It would be great if they put like these pieces around Kevin Durant. Like,
yes,
this is the team to put around a superstar and call it a
exactly.
day. But until further notice, I think they're lucky to get to 100 points. You know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They don't have an offensive creation, so I think the Celtics should beat the Nets, right? And I said if they can go 5-2 in that 7-game stretch, I think they have a really good chance at 60 wins. They beat Indiana and Philly. The Philly win was huge. I think they'll beat Brooklyn. I think that's fine, which means they would have to go 1-1 against the Cavs and 1-1 against the Knicks. I think the Knicks will play the Celtics well. Fun fact, the Knicks are the only division team to beat the Celtics this season. They've swept the Raptors, they've swept the Sixers, and they've swept the Nets so far. And so I think the Knicks play the Celtics well. And so if I had to guess, I think the Celtics could and should beat them twice, but it would not surprise me at all for the Knicks to take one of the 2 games they have upcoming. So I think it'll be a tough game. I think it will be, I don't think it'll be super high scoring unless the Celtics get hot, because that's the thing with the Celtics. If they just start making like a bunch of threes, it's going to rain, right? Like, and that's kind of the duality of them is if they're hot, they'll win. If they're not, it'll be a struggle. So if the Celtics don't get hot, which they can do, I think it'll be a really close game. And if they do that twice, I think it could go 1-1. But if the Celtics get hot, and then I think it's just like, that's just who they are this season.
Which is how the first matchup went. You know, the Celtics made all those threes at the Garden. The Knicks they're still kind of figuring themselves out, to be honest. They had just taken, they didn't have Quentin Grimes. They had just taken Evan Fournier out of the starting 5. Emmanuel quickly hadn't been elevated to this kind of 6th starter role where he plays like close to 30 minutes anyway. And they were, it's tough to really go back to them. The game they played in Boston, where the second unit came in and really erased that lead, and the Knicks then were still figuring out their crunch time offense. So Boston was able to tie it and send it to overtime. That I think is more indicative of where these two teams are now. And look, I'm curious how this Knicks heat check is going to go, but what better way than against Boston and against the defending East champs and one of the best teams in the NBA. Jack, you've been great with your time. I really appreciate it. Tell the fine folks at home where they can find you and all your stuff.
Yeah, thank you for letting me go on all the tangents. You guys can find me on Twitter at JacksonOneABA. You can see it on the screen right there. My work at heavy.com is there, right, for a bunch of NBA, but like for Celtics blog, you can find me there. I wrote something today about Al Horford, kind of destroying the Sixers, which was really funny. So that's it. Celtics blog is the main place for Celtics content, and Jackson One NBA. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Of course, man. Thanks for coming.